Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, all. It's Barry here. And I'd like to welcome you to my YouTube channel, aboxwithnolid. A channel I'm creating not just to bring awareness to the day-to-day realities complex trauma creates, but I really want to delve into some of the mechanisms behind it and create paths and ways of healing. Now, as I mentioned in a few previous videos, I want to start to go into a little bit more detail around attachment and understanding how we connect to those around us and how that relates to trauma and how trauma changes it. Now, attachment theory, you guys can go off and research that yourselves. But I want to look at it more from, other than just words, I want to look at it more from the perspective of understanding how it works within us. And I also want to say from the get-go that attachment trauma can be healed. But I believe the approach, particularly in the Western world, is not the most effective way. When I spent time years ago in Indigenous communities, when I was searching for my family back home in Canada and the US, if you want to understand the pathway trauma plays, look at Indigenous communities, because generationally they've arguably experienced some of the worst traumas through the systemic abuse and through how they were assimilated and targeted by the occupying countries. And when I was up at some conferences and that in Northern Ontario, observing how some of the aunties and grandmas and grandpas approached healing that trauma. When you're looking at Canadian First Nations, you're particularly looking at residential school survivors and the flow-on generational effect from there, and the amount of abuse that was contained within these residential schools, these boarding schools. And when you start to break down the traditional protocols within the tribal communities, those protocols, the traditions that have been handed on for thousands of years, create the framework to be able to heal attachment and connection. And if we can heal attachment and connection, we can pretty much heal any trauma. Those day-to-day living, day-to-day family structure, day-to-day community structure, problem-solving protocols create the basis for how they've approached, and I've seen some healing miracles within Indigenous communities. I've seen some that have gone through some horrific trauma, come out the other side, and have become such valuable members within their own communities and step in to heal others that have gone through those similar traumas or the consequence. Because we know in our societies, many times when people have been abused and that abuse is not addressed and in fact reinforced, they become perpetrators themselves, as sad as that is. So when we look at understanding attachment, if you look at how the older worlds, the older races and communities have understood it, we can learn a great deal around how we can approach healing attachment trauma. One of the other fundamentals in regards to attachment is it's not a singular thing. It's not this singular mechanism that just plays out, whether it works or it doesn't. Trauma is a vastly complex, multiple-layered process, starting in utero, in our second trimester. Everything our mother experiences crosses the placenta and shapes how we will connect and attach and how we will interpret our world. It prepares our body and our neurophysiology to deal with the type of world we're going to be born into by what crosses the placenta from our mother. So there is that connection. I've seen studies where they've shown how it played the mother's voice as if underwater to a newborn infant, and there's a reaction, a very connected reaction from that newborn infant, because the mother's voice is filtered through the amniotic fluid, through her skin and her body, to a developing infant. There's all these bonding processes that happen in that environment. And that shapes the construction of how we connect. Attachment is not a cognitive thing. It's not ticking off some boxes on a list. I would say 90% of all our attachment base is purely biological, purely physiological, endocrine, neurological. It's how we feel is what attachment is about. How we feel is what pushes us to engage, gives us the emotional investment in being part of. When we understand this, that it's an entire ecology, and it is the critical core of what and who we are as a biological being, attachment should become the most valued aspect when we look at how we can heal from trauma, when we look at what we need to do to heal from trauma. Because when we have a dysfunctional attachment, regardless of all the different labels, it will unravel any attempt we try to heal. So for me, understanding how we've attached, understanding the layers and blocks that we have is super critical before we start to try to push ourselves through the process of facing the memories and the reenactments of trauma. As I've said in numerous videos, if we can learn to heal and actually belong, we will heal our trauma. Our trauma will naturally just release. We will process it once we know we are safe and we are belonging and we are part of. So when we understand that attachment trauma can be healed, as I said, I've seen it with my own eyes in Indigenous communities. Being honest, I've never seen it in a Western world context. But I have seen it in Indigenous communities. So for me, it's smart money is to look at how they do it. And the years of understanding, the generations of understanding of the importance of the process of connection, of having a structure to process and problem solve conflict that is within a community structure, not one-sided. It is within the functional structure of a community. It creates and places the importance upon the grandmas and the aunties and the grandpas and the uncles and the way families are created and their relationship to everything around. All those different protocols, and we all come from an indigenous base somewhere in the world, and all indigenous peoples have these protocols in one form or another. If we go back far enough, they're all there. And within those protocols is everything we need to understand how to heal from trauma, to heal our connection and our relationships, to heal our connection and relationships to nature before we can learn to heal as a pathway of learning to heal our connections to people. You know, in this particular video, I just want to portray the hope for all of you out there, as isolated as trauma makes us, that if we focus on healing how we connect and understanding what has blocked us, and in the next couple of videos I will get into this in stepping down more and more detail, but if we understand that and we work with that with ourselves, we will get happier. We will heal. I can't stress that enough, is we will heal. And it's not a quick fix. It's a slow road. But each step gives us a greater understanding. And if we look at and value the knowledge of the traditional elders of Indigenous communities, and if the Western medical construct would get out of its own self-importance and go respectfully to these elders and learn, we can bring that base back into our societies, because the family structures are so broken down now, in the Western world in particular, that the base isn't there to work with. Yeah, there are loads of different types of therapies that can work with attachment, but you gotta have a base to plug those therapies into within the person that's doing those therapies. That's the thing. That's one of the points I want to get across in this video, is when practitioners put forward these exercises, I've gone through them myself, and I've known countless people that have. When you don't have that base, or when your body doesn't participate the way the therapy kind of expects you to, it becomes your fault. And it creates a real barrier to getting help, and it actually becomes a negative reinforcement. But as I said, if we understand the protocols, all the ways that we interact within a community, and within that community, within a natural world, and if we learn them through how indigenous communities approach this in the old way, and they're not complicated. It's not huge volumes of information. It's really common sense, basic, day-to-day life stuff. But there's processes of balance, there's processes of respect, there's processes of accountability and understandings, and ways of doing things that in the beginning might not make sense, but down the road they will. You know, it's sort of like the Karate Kid kind of analogy. The wax on, wax off. Makes no sense washing the car. But it does when you've taught the muscle memory of reflex. These things teach about connection. And if we can work on our own connection to the natural world and to the environment around us, it can give us the base to be able to plug in all these different things that come in either from therapists or in the books we read or the videos we watch. But we have to understand that base of attachment and what didn't happen. The next video I'll go into a little bit more detail, but what doesn't connect remains until it's resolved. And that shapes how we connect from there on in. So, as always, I love your guys' feedback. Trust me, you can heal your connection. It does take time, but you can. I love your guys' feedback. Please be mindful. Please be safe. And I'll see you next time.